Okay, we're live. So, what's up, Vorcazm?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. Okay, so you seem to disagree with some of the things that I said when I was reviewing the law-correct debate.
Yeah. Disagreed with a few things.
Okay, so what are some of those?
Well, I was thinking about the evil God hypothesis that you were talking about a bit there. And you seem to say that there was no reason to believe, like there's no reason to reject the evil God hypothesis any more than the good God hypothesis. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Um, well, so I think that I would say that there is slightly more reason to accept the good God hypothesis, just on the basis of there being lots of smart people who believe in the God hypothesis, and virtually no one who believes in the evil God hypothesis. But I think that there are no sort of lower level. Like I think that there are, based on my read of the arguments on both sides, I don't think that there are any good arguments for preserving one over the other. But I think that there are, like, in many cases, it's reasonable to defer to smarter people and to not assign insignificant credences. But so I don't think that there are not any good arguments of which I'm aware for establishing that the good God hypothesis is more likely than the evil God hypothesis.
Okay. Well, so it was my understanding that the evil God hypothesis isn't a good hypothesis because if we're using God to define good and evil, it doesn't make sense to say God is contrary to his own nature or that God is differently than how he is. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
So
we need a different definition of good and evil.
yeah. So obviously, if we define evil as being part of God's nature, or sorry, good as being whatever corresponds to God's nature, then by definition, the deity would not be good. But so one, that wouldn't rule out a deity that is said to be good by this definition, that's in favor of wanton torture, murder, and destruction and harming of the innocent. And second, so if by good all you mean is corresponding to God's nature, that doesn't seem to track what most people mean by good. And so it seems like it seems like at least possible to imagine a being creating a world, but that being nonetheless being evil. And so if God were in favor of wanton torture, murder, and destruction, it seems like most people would say that was not a good God, but rather that was an evil God.
Well, I think that confuses what people perceive something to be with what it actually is. Like, I can perceive light as this warm thing on my face that makes me feel good, but it's actually some fancy wave particle thing that I don't understand happening under the hood. That's very unintuitive when I bask in the sun. But I don't think it's a good argument to say, because it feels like it's this way. That's what I'm talking about when I say it. That therefore it can't be differently under the hood. I don't think that follows. Like, it could just be that when we say right and wrong, we're talking about things that we don't like because of emotional, right, experiences within us, obviously. But the actual, like, objective sense of what we're alluding to, if we say that it comes from God and it's rooted in God's nature, then it could, like, we perfectly coherently could live in a universe where God actually just gave us these intuitions, but he really just likes to hurt people and make them suffer. I don't think there's anything illogical about that. Like, it seems unintuitive,
Sure.
right?
So I think that when we say that something is good, that denotes that one has a reason to do it, and that it's what would be approved of by a perfectly impartial and rational committee. So, and that
Well, I
seems
don't
to
know
at
about
least.
rational. I think that might beg the question a little bit, don't you think? Like,
No, I
rational
don't
in
think
what
that it.
sense?
Well, so rational in that being
Like, perfectly logical?
responding, yeah, responding to reasons. So like not just logical in like not violating the laws of non-contradiction and stuff, but also logical in terms of like assessing evidence, forming conclude. Like there are certain things that we can that can be puzzled out, but that don't follow just straightforwardly from the laws of logic, right? So like the chat. Here, I changed the title to God Debate with Vorcazm just to get more views. So there are certain truths that rely on how good one is at assessing the evidence. So just whatever we mean by being rational, just this being is just the most souped up version of this. So they're just the best possible at thinking. So what we would care about if we were impartial and rational. And I see no reason to think that just because something corresponds with the nature of the creator, that it would be approved of by an impartial and rational committee.
Well, I mean, you and I are pretty decent at reasoning. I don't think that just because we approve of something that makes it good or bad, right?
No, but so the distinction would be twofold. So one, so things are good, and because they are good, that's what provides us with the impartial reasons. So it can be analogized to like so moral reasons. I think are analogous to epistemic reasons in that regard. So like it is reasonable to believe that the Earth is round rather than flat. The reason why it's reasonable to believe that is because the evidence provides us with reasons. And it's not true that it gives us reasons because rational people would conclude that way. It's that rational people would conclude that way because it provides us with reasons. But second, I think, while we're pretty rational, we're not perfectly rational or perfectly impartial. And so I don't think that would count. And that's shown by the fact that, perfectly rational, if we accept moral realism, then perfectly rational and impartial beings would not disagree. And so if you think that, and we do disagree, so that means that one of us is not perfectly rational and impartial, at least in the moral domain.
Exactly.
And I think it's you. No,
right. It probably is. But so if we posit a God for the source of morality, then how do we say that, if we have this perfectly rational being, I'm sure he would believe that these things are good rather than those things are good. I mean, how can we I don't see how one disagrees with the other in this sense.
So the point is just that, so you're claiming that morality is just whatever is about God's character, even if it were in favor of wanton destruction. Yeah. So the point is just that if one were rational and impartial, it seems like they would not approve of wanton misery, even if that were in correspondence with the nature of the designer. It seems possible for a designer to bring about a bad moral design.
How did you figure that if somebody was perfectly rational and impartial that they would agree with you? That seems like a bit begging the question, don't you think?
Well, no. So it's not that if they were perfectly rational and impartial, they would agree with me. It's that if a person was perfectly rational and impartial, and they were making the decision about whether or not to undergo everyone to undergo horrific torture, it seems like they would vote no on that. And so the evidence for this comes from the fact that generally, people who are very smart and very rational and who reflect a lot tend not to want it to undergo horrific torture. And
but hold on, philosophy isn't done by democratic vote, though. There are lots of things that very smart people would do that are just plain ridiculous.
Right. So you asked me how I would justify the claim. So I think that the claim that so if we want to figure out what a perfectly rational and impartial entity would do, so we could sort of employ reasoning to figure out things, reason based on plausible axioms. Sorry. Reason based on plausible axioms, and we can see what very rational and very impartial people want to believe. If we want to figure out what the best possible chess player, what their moves would be, it might make sense to look at the moves that our best chess playing AI currently make.
So to be clear, when you say person, are you talking about a human person or just like this kind of vague, maybe bodiless being? Because I think when you say person, you're probably going to import in a lot of problematic things, like people come with the tendency to want to eat and want to poop and do all these things that have absolutely no bearing on rationality, but they still impact the way that we pursue things in the world, right?
Well, no, I think that eating is rational. If you didn't eat, you would starve to death.
The conclusion that you would starve to death if you didn't eat, that's rational. But simply the process of eating, if I made a supercomputer that could solve every equation, it wouldn't go around eating, right? If I made a supercomputer that could think somehow.
Well, no, but I think that if you made a supercomputer that was perfectly rational and needed food to survive, then it would eat.
Well, but why are we? What I'm asking is, why are we alluding to this person having human capacities and then saying that it's perfectly rational, right?
Well, we're not we're not alluding to the person having human capacities. The question is just so to the extent that they are impartial. One of the affected, some of the affected agents on the ground are persons, and so it makes sense to look at how third-party observers and people who have direct experience with things, how they evaluate things. And one thing that I think we can be pretty confident of is that if we were very rational even if we found out that our creator wanted us to suffer, that would not lead us to conclude that we should thus suffer horrifically. I mean, do you have any argument for why, like, the knowledge that our creator would want us to suffer would give us any reason to suffer? Because
Well,
if not, then it
yeah.
just seems to rest on a much more tenuous philosophical foundation than the notion that our reasons not to suffer are independently of what a creator would want.
Well, I think it's just a completely insignificant question one way or the other, because well, what you're essentially relying on is you're using inductive evidence to kind of make this assumption of what a perfectly rational being would do, given our lack of perfect rationality, and then we're concluding that this perfect rational being would agree with us on this certain thing, and so that is yet more inductive evidence that this certain thing is good. And then God isn't doing that thing, but if we actually stop and we ground the like ontological existence of this goodness, we'll find that it's necessarily rooted in God's nature, which means we really don't have any complaint to begin with. So I think it's just a mess of inductive arguments stacked on top of inductive assumptions.
So
Like it doesn't
what?
really have any good impact. Sorry, what?
So what's the so why should we think that morality is just whatever God's character demands, such that God's character could not be bad, even if we're in favor of wanton torture?
Are you asking under theism or just in general?
Well, your view is that in order to ground morality, we need to have ground it in the nature of whatever being created us. I'm asking why.
Yeah,
Why?
exactly.
Why would we think that?
Well, is-ought divide is a good explanation for it, right? We can just kind of say, why is this good over and over? And we keep going up the links in the chain, we realize it's not actually grounded in anything, then it doesn't matter how many arbitrary chains we can draw up, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that. I don't need to tell you about the
Well, right.
divide.
So the is-ought divide will say two things. One, I don't understand how you cross the is-ought divide, because you're saying it is the case that our creator created us to want, that our creator's character was pro-torture, or like if it was the case that our character's creator was pro-X, then we ought to do X, and that is crossing the is-ought divide. I don't understand how you get out of that, but well, and I also I think that's a more serious challenge, but I also don't think that the is-ought divide is very much of a challenge. It just proves that we cannot derive moral facts straightforwardly from empirical facts, but we also can't derive things about the future straightforwardly from empirical facts. We can't figure out what will be straightforwardly from what is. We also can't figure out facts about the past from what is. We also can't figure out mathematical facts or modal facts or anything else. It's just we employ different ways of reasoning about in those other domains. And so the moral naturalist is going to say that, no, actually, moral facts are a type of natural fact. So we don't need anything mysterious to cross the is-ought divide. And moral non-naturalists are going to say, no, they're not a type of natural fact. And so moral facts are true in virtue of other moral facts, which we can arrive at through reason or whatever. And so in either case, it just doesn't seem like a very serious threat.
Well, yeah, so good question. So the is-ought divide is not, I don't believe, at least I don't apply it to be concerned with like an epistemological derivation of moral facts, but like the actual ontological grounding of their existence, as in like how could it come to be that this is true, right? So under theism, of course, it makes perfect sense that if God defines us as having moral attributes, then we simply have those moral attributes, right, by virtue of what we are. But if under naturalism, for example, sorry, did you want to say?
Well, yeah. So I think that, so I don't understand why God, like, defining us as having more. So in terms of the first point, I think that I would just, so I think that some of the distinction between naturalism and non-naturalists are slightly confused, but I don't know if I didn't think that I would be broadly classified as a naturalist, though I would be very close. And so I can just say that I don't think that moral facts are grounded within empirical facts about the world, grounded within just sort of they're necessarily supervenient facts, sort of like mathematical facts or logical facts.
But what's obligatory about mathematical facts or logical facts? Like, natural facts are obligatory because we can't act in a supernatural way because you and I are just natural.
Right. No. So obviously moral facts.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
They're a special kind of universal absolute, right? We can agree on that because with natural facts we can't disobey them, and with logical and mathematical facts we can conceptualize things one way or the other. But with moral facts we can we have the free will to behave one way or another, but we have an obligation to behave one way. Nothing about the other facts, I think, insinuates that in any way. So how can that exist?
Yeah, so obviously moral facts are different in certain ways from the other facts, and that moral facts are we don't we don't have to. Well, so I think that we do have to be bound by the moral facts, and that it has to be wrong to like torture infants for fun. But so I think that we do have to be bound by them, but they don't have the same types of implications as the other facts. But just pointing out that they're different in certain ways from the other facts doesn't show anything to show the strangeness of moral facts or why they can't exist in the same way. But I think that a very good analogy would be epistemic facts, what we're justified in believing. We don't have to believe what we're justified in believing, but I don't think that epistemic facts are, and I think that there are certain things that we're justified in believing. I think we're justified in believing that the Earth is round and that the Holocaust happened. And that possesses a certain type of normativity. And it doesn't require it doesn't require like crossing the is to epistemic ought gap, because epistemic oughts are just supervenient on facts about the world, like mathematics.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I actually do argue that there is an epistemic is-ought divide as well. And that, like, if I just countered your argument with, well, I like believing this, then the atheist would have no response. So it's kind of funny you brought that up.
So I agree that maybe we would have no response that would be convincing to someone who doesn't care about reason. But I think that, if
not even convincing, but just objectively good, right?
Well, I think that if we give an objectively valid argument and the person accepts all of the premises, then to the extent that they reject the conclusion, they are being irrational.
Right, but what's an objectively valid argument?
An argument where if the premises are true, the conclusion will logically follow.
Who says that's an objectively good argument? Maybe an objectively good argument is something different. Is there an objective standard of what objectively good arguments is?
Well, this is just the way that I'm using the terms, and so it just, there are certain facts that I think we have sort of direct acquaintance with, and one of them that I take myself to have direct acquaintance with is that if an argument is sound, if the premises are true, and the conclusion follows from the premises, then
a priori, properly basic. Like I'm with you there. I'm not asking how you know it. I'm asking like how it can be.
I don't understand
objectively good.
I don't understand what the problem is. Like, I don't think that there's any deeper account of how that is. Like
what makes it objectively good? Is it your understanding of it that makes it objectively good? Like if you believed, if every human being believed that the laws of logic were supposed to work differently, would it make that the new objectively good way to argue?
No, it's not. It's not grounded in what individual people believe, nor is it grounded in what everyone believes. It's just a necessary fact. So there's no deeper account of why it is. It's like asking like why are mathematical facts true? They just are, right?
Okay, well then, so I think now we circle back to the epistemic problem of how do you know that that's just what is, right?
Well, so I think that for certain things,
you can feel that that's how things ought to be, right? You can have an implicit knowledge of things being the way that they are, but that calls upon the reliability of your implicit knowledge. So it's just kind of like a two-step circular argument in that regard.
Well, no. So there are certain things that I take myself to have direct acquaintance with. Some of those include mathematical facts. Some of those include logical facts.
When you say you take yourself to have direct acquaintance with them, you don't mean that you quite literally have direct acquaintance with them. You mean you assume for all intents and purposes that you have direct acquaintance.
I think that I am non-inferentially justified in believing them. So as per the Munchausen trilemma, for any claim that you believe, you can keep asking how you know it. You justify it with another belief. You ask how we know that. So we can either adopt coherentism, which I don't have super strong views. Well, I
disagree with that though. I think that there are things we can know for certain, right? Like Descartes, I think, therefore I am, is a pretty self-explanatory argument.
So I would dispute slightly that we can know it for certain, but I think that there are certain things that we can have like basic direct acquaintance with, whereby we can be non-inferentially justified in them. So just based on, so much like how I can know that I'm conscious, I don't need to have I don't know that I'm conscious through reasoning backwards from other beliefs. I just am directly aware of the fact that I'm conscious. I think I can similarly be directly aware of the fact that 2 + 2 = 4, or the fact that if an argument is sound, then the conclusion must be true.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you get how do you get to the position that you're just directly aware that 2 + 2 = 4? Like if I asserted that I was directly aware that all my positions were true, you'd probably have a similar question for me. How do you know that 2 + 2 = 4?
Well, so I mean, there are some things that you can be directly acquainted with, right? We both agree on that, right? You can know I would dispute complete absolute certainty, but you can know that you're conscious.
Okay. Oh, you do dispute that. Okay. See, I think you can know with absolute certainty.
So just to be clear, so my dispute would be that I think that my basis for that is that there are certain it's in theory possible that we think we're conscious, but in reality somehow this consciousness idea is just totally malformed and we're being deceived by a
I don't think that's possible at all. How could we be deceived if we're not conscious? What's there to deceive if there's a lack of consciousness?
Well, but
can you deceive a rock into thinking that it's alive? The rock would have to be thinking in order to be tricked into thinking.
Right. So I don't think that it is possible. But much like in dreams, how there are sometimes when you think that there's something cogent, and then when you wake up, you're like, wait, what? Like, what was I even thinking about? Like, it seems at least that we cannot rule out with 100% absolute certainty that there are some things that we sort of think that we can know with certainty, but that we actually are in some amount of doubt. But this is sort of a very minor point. This is not really that relevant. But I'd be curious as to how these are difficult epistemological problems about how we grant everything. But I don't understand how your account does any better. So I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about that.
Sure. So should we start with the the is-ought divide, or where do you want to start? Where should I start?
Let's start with how you conclude that there are epistemic facts.
How I conclude that there are epistemic facts?
Yeah.
Well, for starters, I think that I think Descartes was right that you can know, I think therefore I am, because suppose I don't think kind of begs the question, like, who's not thinking and who's supposing that you're not thinking, right? So I think from the perspective of the argument, which is where all arguments take place, it has to be true that I'm thinking. And so I think we can do that with a number of things. And one of those things is God, because what we have to ground our reasoning in ultimately comes from things like the validity of logical facts and logical laws, right? And that they are actually objectively valuable, as you were talking about, right? The is-ought divide for truth. That it's actually good to believe that 1 + 1 = 2. If I came up to you and I said, hey, 1 + 1 = 3, you would be justified in telling me, no, 1 + 1 = 2, and believing that and propagating that belief. I think these are all.
Sorry. Just to be clear, when you say it's good, are you talking about in a moral sense or in an epistemic sense?
I'm talking about in an epistemic sense, like an epistemic obligation, a normative epistemic sense. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that, but I'm not sure why we need God to think that
is-ought divide, right? We can't get an ought from an is. Just because just because I like to believe something, or maybe it helps me survive, right? My ultimate reasoning for following that quote unquote obligation is just it's just a hypothetical imperative. It's just like, it's a means to an end, right? It has to be an end of itself. Otherwise it's not obligatory.
Yeah, sorry. Can you walk me through how you get from the fact that you can't get an ought from an is to the fact that we need God?
Sure. Well, I think it's just a two-step problem, right? Number one, we can't get an ought from an is, right, with the is-ought divide, and then number two, God does bridge the gap. So which one did you want me to go over, or just both?
God bridges gap. Well, so
yeah,
I agree with one, but I don't know why I would agree with two.
Well, because if God defines us as having attributes, and he's defining us ontologically, this isn't a linguistic thing, right? God is making us, and he is attaching all attributes to us, similarly to how if you and I had a logical supposition, right? We said, suppose there's a guy who ought to push a red button. If you raise the is-ought divide on that, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because the is-ought divide, it only goes up one link in the chain recursively, and it says, oh, what's higher than that? What's higher than that? Until you find that there is no ultimate connection and the thing falls apart. But it doesn't make sense to raise the is-ought divide on the ultimate source of this chain, and say, well, why is he obligated to push the red button? It's like, well, that's what we define him as. We define him as a guy who ought to push a red button. So it's perfectly, you would have to argue that morality is simply logically incoherent, or that objective obligations are simply always logically incoherent in order to defend this position, because otherwise God could just create us as having obligations, and then
Yeah,
we just
so
have them.
yeah, so let's start with the rational point. So you say that if God creates us as rational, and we are rational. Well, so that's true, but there are lots of other hypotheses. One hypothesis is that we're just completely fundamentally deluded and irrational. I don't think that that's very likely, but that's one thing.
We could be,
Also,
yeah.
we could have been made rational by the process of evolution, which selected for having more rational beliefs.
Well, I don't agree with that either.
Why not?
Well, if you recall our last chat that we had a couple days ago, I was going over it briefly with that guy. I don't remember what his name was, but essentially I drew up a very professional diagram in MS Paint, a very, very expensive software called MS Paint. And I drew a couple of circles, and one was natural thoughts and one was logical thoughts, right? And so in my view of how human thought works, we have this sort of Venn diagram where there are some thoughts that are logical but they never come into being in nature, and there are some thoughts that exist naturally but they're just illogical thoughts, right? And then in the middle we have this overlap. But if what you're saying is true, and we have evolution gives us the ability to reason, we actually have this large circle of nature which encompasses all thoughts, and then inside of that is logical thoughts. And what this entails is that there are some thoughts that are, or rather all thoughts that are logical are natural, which is absurd. Or if we flip them, all thoughts that are all thoughts that are natural are logical, which is also absurd, right? So we have to have a way of distinguishing logical thoughts from natural thoughts. And I think that the criteria in our head, or the process that we use to distinguish logical thoughts from illogical thoughts, that itself can't be a natural phenomenon because it's interacting with the logical phenomenon, with the natural phenomenon. So it doesn't make sense for it to be a part of the thing. Like, it wouldn't be distinctly judging a natural phenomenon if it was a natural phenomenon itself, because then it would fall into the same circular reasoning, right? How do we justify that?
Wait, sorry. The brain, which distinguishes between rational and non-rational thoughts, can't be natural because why?
Well, yes. So I believe that we have a non-physical part of our mind, right, that is grounded in the image of God. And I think that this is necessarily true because what distinguishes natural logical thoughts from natural illogical thoughts can't itself be exclusively natural. Otherwise, it would fall under the same criticisms of those thoughts, right? So it's just kind of circular logic to say, some natural logical thoughts are, or some natural thoughts are logical and some aren't, and I'm judging this with my natural thinking mechanisms, right? It just sort of begs the question.
Okay, so
like it kind of goes back to what you said. We could be completely, just every thought could be completely illusory, right? We have absolutely no way of saying one way or another.
Okay, so I guess I'm not quite sure why the mechanism for distinguishing between irrational natural thoughts. So I would say that there are some natural rational thoughts, some irrational natural thoughts. There are some rational thoughts that don't naturally arise, and some irrational thoughts that don't naturally arise. I don't understand why the mechanism for distinguishing between the rational and the irrational thoughts cannot itself be natural. And it seems like we could run a parody of that for divinity. So if you think that God makes us in his image, that makes us have some rational thoughts and some irrational thoughts, then we could just do the same Venn diagram, but with divine versus not divine versus logical and not logical.
Well, I agree with you that we can draw the same parallel for, God. But this isn't just some sort of existential crisis. It's supposed to be a reductio, right? Like, if nothing that we have is necessarily true, then it isn't logical, because that's one of the requirements of logic. So, I think it's necessarily true that we.
Sorry,
why? You want to ask about that?
Why is necessary truth a requirement of logic? Like, can't something that we believe logically be just contingently true?
Well, no. Necessary, as in it follows the laws of logic to necessary conclusions. So, for example, if I said, Bigfoot says so, therefore the sky is blue, right? The sky is blue is a true conclusion, but Bigfoot says so doesn't lead you there necessarily. So, like,
Oh,
you would say that that's a what's the funny word for that? They have funny words for everything these days.
bad argument.
Yeah, not bad. I was thinking of the other funny word, the non sequitur or whatever, right? Like, it doesn't lead to that necessarily, right? Just because Bigfoot says so, that doesn't make the sky blue, right? So we need logical processes that actually necessarily give us truth. And some people would say, oh well, inductive reasoning doesn't work that way, but I disagree. I think even inductive reasoning works with necessary truth, because you're saying it's necessarily true that this is more likely than not, given the evidence.
Okay, I guess I'm still I'm still not clear on why. Wait, so when you say follow the laws of logic, I'm slightly unclear about that. So would you say that animals would follow the laws of logic, in that animals cannot have contradictory things, but they don't like consciously act on the laws of logic. They act on instinct, but they just can't violate the laws of logic.
Yeah, like animal behavior, we can describe. We would describe as being. We would describe in a manner that would follow the laws of logic. Like our descriptions would follow the laws of logic. Yeah, like I agree with that, right? Because the physical world is consistent, similarly to how we can use computers to aid ourselves in things, because computers use electricity that's consistent, but the computers aren't reasoning, right? We're reasoning using the computers.
Okay, so all right, so now how do you overcome the divine parity?
Well, it's a reductio. So I would just say, like, in both cases, it's absurd, right? But under theism, we actually have an opportunity for things to be differently, right? We have an opportunity for God. It's God makes us in His image, and He gives us this this transcendent human reason, this ability to, this free will to distinguish truth from falsehood, and this gives us this. This is something we have to import in our reasoning. That's kind of the point. So
Okay,
you can make the parody, but I think both are just absurd, and atheists
but can't I say that evolution gives us reasoning the same way that you say God does?
Well, no, it can't, for the reasons I just described, because the natural phenomenon, the natural process that you're using to distinguish these natural thoughts is itself a natural phenomenon, right? So
Okay,
it can't.
but why? Right, but in the case of God that you gave,
Mhm.
the thing that, so you say that for there are certain given that we were made in the image of God, there are certain irrational thoughts. So there are divine rational thoughts, there are non-divine rational thoughts, there are non-divine irrational thoughts, and wait, sorry, I forgot the order of the things. But so in your
There's
case,
four Punnett square things.
right. So, but you're using a divine mechanism to filter through divine incorrect versus divine and incorrect. I'm not sure why a naturalistic mechanism can't filter between thoughts that arise naturally and are irrational, and thoughts that arise naturally and are rational.
Well, I don't think that I don't think that the natural, or I would say non-divine rational thoughts can exist. I think that's kind of the point of the argument, right? So I think
You
there's
don't think
three that are coherent, and then there's one that's not, and the two that
you
are
don't think
coherent
that
that believe in irrational thoughts are irrational.
Wait, sorry, you don't think that there can be non-divine rational thoughts?
I don't think that there can be non-divine rational thoughts. No.
So we couldn't we couldn't even, like, a universe where there is no God, but there were rational creatures is logically impossible.
Yes, that's what I think.
What would be the contradiction?
Well, it's as I described, the mechanisms that we are using to reason, they presuppose something beyond themselves.
Well, so I don't think that well, so I think that statement's ambiguous, but even if we accept it, like, explain to me how this is a fact that has to be true across all possible worlds. Like, it seems eminently conceivable that we can imagine just a disembodied mind that's perfectly rational and thinks interesting thoughts. You hold that that's logically impossible. Why?
Wait, that thinks interesting thoughts? I mean, you can think interesting
Sorry,
thoughts.
that thinks rational thoughts. That figures out Fermat's last theorem.
Yeah,
you think
sure.
that's impossible? Why?
Yes, because the processes that we use to distinguish things, when we say rational, what we mean is that it follows the laws of logic to necessarily true conclusions. So I would first ask, where's this thing getting these laws of logic? Is it something internal to its own mind, right? Is there no external universe and it's just thinking things? Is it just
Yeah.
philosophizing?
Yeah.
Because
This
then
is just sort of a disembodied mind that's just musing, let's say.
right, so then it's kind of begging the question to say, like, these are reasonable because they follow the laws of logic, when in this universe the laws of logic aren't actually universal constraints, they're something inside of the brain, right? Like, I can come up with laws of poggers and then use that to determine my own outcomes if I
Right.
want, and it doesn't make those rational.
So it's your view that the laws of logic are not true across all possible worlds?
Well, no, I'm not saying that they are or are not. I'm simply saying, like, I'm asking where you would get the laws of logic in this other possible
Well,
world, because you told me it's internal.
on my view, I don't think that we need to get the laws of logic. I think the laws of logic just are necessarily.
Well, no, that's not what I mean by get the laws of logic. Obviously, you don't have to go and pick them up out of your garden every day before you use them. What
Well,
I'm
no, but I don't think that the laws of logic have any deeper grounding. I think that they
right,
just are
I'm asking
necessarily.
where, like, from where you are justifying the laws of logic, right? In
Well,
our
that's an
universe, we'd say
epistemic
it's a
question.
constraint. Well, sure, but I'm saying, in this case, we have this constraint on our universe, and then our brains kind of import that, and we have a mechanism that says, given this rule beyond my own brain, I'm going to compare these natural thoughts that I have against the laws of logic and see if they are logical or are not logical. If that mechanism is itself like physically contained within your own little scope, the scope of your own mind, and the laws are contained exclusively within the scope of your own mind, then it's just purely question begging to say, hey, this is reasonable
Well,
because the rules in my head say they're reasonable.
no. So it's not true. It's not that they're reasonable because the rules in your head say that they're reasonable. It's that there are necessary rules that apply that you sort of have to apply that apply across all possible worlds, and the rules in your head based on stipulation, they abide by them. I still am not sure that I understand the contradiction. So sorry, can you just spell out just in as great of detail as possible, just like what things would have to be both true and not true for this world to arise?
For the world to rise. So
Because you're saying that it's contradictory.
yeah, of course. So just to confirm, the world we're talking about a world where there's a brain floating in the void, like a Boltzmann brain, right?
Yeah.
But this is a purely rational Boltzmann brain.
Right.
Okay, and the universe contains no other minds, no other entities. It's just a bunch of floating rocks and stuff. And this Boltzmann brain is alluding to fill in the blank for me. These objective, universal, absolute laws, like the laws of logic.
The
that exists
Boltzmann
beyond
brain
itself.
figures out Fermat's last theorem and other interesting things.
Right. Okay, but when you say figure out, are you talking about it follows laws of nature and just kind of luckily stumbles upon truth? Or are you saying that it actually follows laws of logic and reaches this conclusion, right? Like, how does it get there?
It follows the laws of mathematics and the laws of logic to reach the conclusion.
Okay, so this is a purely physical brain, right? And this brain follows
well,
like
I was
laws outside of
originally
itself.
I was originally imagining it as a disembodied mind, but I guess it could be physical, sure.
Wait, a disembodied mind?
Yeah, so like
where does
it
the
didn't have
disembodied mind exist? Like, where?
Well, no, I don't think it exists in the real world.
No. I mean, in this world, where is it? Is it?
Well, no, it's it doesn't have a physical form. It just is. There's just this.
It just
this
is.
sort of
So this isn't a
thinker of
physical world.
thoughts.
This is a special ghost zone.
Right. Yeah, sure. So though actually, it's fine. We can imagine that it's physical.
Okay, so like a Boltzmann brain,
yeah,
a whole galaxy
a Boltzmann
of like
brain that figures out Fermat's last theorem.
Okay, wow, we're getting real good now. Okay, so a Boltzmann brain, with a bunch of spinning crap, and this Boltzmann brain, it doesn't just figure out, it doesn't just come to believe something that's true by chance, but it actually is caused to believe this thing. Or not caused, but it actually like willfully follows the laws of logic. Is that what you're implying?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does this thing, if this thing is purely physical, how is it following the laws of logic?
Well,
is it simply that the laws of logic happen to, or I'm sorry, the laws of nature happen to produce it to follow the laws of logic? Like, we just happen to get a Boltzmann brain that is following the laws of logic right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so like, that could just brings like, yeah, that's perfectly coherent, but it brings me back to my other epistemic problem, which is that all natural thoughts would have to be logical thoughts, right?
Well, no, this is a counterexample. This is a logical thought that is not a divine thought. You were earlier saying that all natural thoughts, that all logical thoughts would have to be divine thoughts, would have to rely on the nature of God. So this being seems perfectly coherent, and its thoughts are rational yet not divine.
Right, but the example that you gave me, all natural thoughts are rational thoughts. So this is still a reductio. Like, this is still an absurd conclusion, because all natural thoughts are not rational thoughts.
Well, no. So this is not. This is just separate from the natural question.
Mm-hmm.
Just earlier, you said that you think that there could not that it would be logically impossible
mm-hmm.
for there to be thoughts that are divine, but not logical.
Yeah,
sorry,
but
sorry, I misspoke.
No, I know what you mean. Not divine,
not
but
divine
logical.
and logical.
Yeah,
right.
But
so this is a counterexample.
Right, but the full argument that I presented was that you would have to either say that all natural thoughts are logical, or none of them are. So in this, like, all we have to do. What's up?
Sorry. Well, couldn't I just hold that some of them are the same way that you would hold that some divine thoughts are
right? But then,
logical,
you run into the same exact problem, which is, how do you distinguish the ones that are from the ones that aren't? Right? It's the same exact problem.
Well, you think carefully the same way that a theist would.
Well,
how do you figure out which thoughts are correct?
I use my image of God, and I use my little Bluetooth chip to interface with the Jesus API in heaven.
Right, so I use my little Bluetooth chip to interface to figure out true things.
Right, but what are you interfacing with? Just more natural processes? This is just my objection again, but with a little bow on it.
Right? No, I think that I think that evolution produced us to be able to rationally form true beliefs, and some of those true beliefs relate to things that are necessary, logical truths, mathematical truths, moral truths, etc.
Right, but you're saying that that these thoughts that we have that are true exist by chance, but that's not reasoning. But if you're saying that they happen to follow exactly how the laws of logic say we ought to go by chance, then that either is reasoning or it isn't. But if it is, sorry, did you want to?
Well, it is reasoning, right? Evolution produced us to be able to employ reasoning.
Well, no, evolution produced us to be able to reach true conclusions. So, like, a way of thinking it is, like, you're not following the laws of logic, you're following the laws of nature, and you're just hoping that they intersect, right? There's nothing necessarily true about anything that you're saying beyond what the laws of nature, like, persuade you into believing or persuade you into concluding. That's what I'm getting at here.
Well, no, so it's not so it's truth. So are you asking epistemically or metaphysically?
Well, there's a bit of a circular problem that goes on. Like, it's a combination of both, right? Because if the truth exists and our ability to reach the truth exists, our own understanding, our own discernment of that truth would then be called into question, because we're saying, well, how do we know that the methods that we're using to reach this truth are good? And once we have this doubt, we run into the same ontological problem of, well, then we don't actually have this necessary truth system in our heads.
In the epistemic sense, how we know things is that evolution produced us to be able to figure things out. And
that's the ontological sense, yeah.
No, that's that's how we're able to form beliefs. The ontological sense is how those beliefs are true. And, well, I don't think that there are any external truth makers. I just think that they just are. There's no deeper account of why mathematical truths are true. They just necessarily are.
Well, I don't see what that has to do with what I'm saying, though. I'm saying that I'm saying that these natural processes in your brain, they aren't necessarily following the laws of if they aren't necessarily following the laws of logic, then they're not rational. And if they are necessarily following the laws of logic, everything that you believe, or every conclusion you can ever draw, is rational. And both of those are absurd conclusions.
No, so they're neither. So they can be rational.
Kind of a trichotomy.
No, they can be irrational without necessarily following the laws of logic. They can follow the laws of the logic most of the time, but sometimes make mistakes. The same way that, on your view, your brain sometimes follows the laws of logic, but also sometimes makes mistakes.
Right. I'm not talking about my brain itself. I'm talking about the thoughts that I have, like any given thought in my
Sure,
brain.
right. So, sorry, when I said brain, I should have meant like your mind, your belief, the part of you that forms beliefs.
Sure. Man, I gotta run in like 12 minutes. I got a meeting. I hope that's all right.
Yeah, no problem. This has
Yeah,
been
so
a
like
chat
my
with you.
thoughts aren't always they're not always rational, right? I agree with that. What I'm saying is
Right.
that I'm saying when we say that they are rational, we say that they are necessarily following the laws of logic. And that's the problem that atheism can't account for, is how can they necessarily be following the laws of logic? What entails that they are? Is it simply, do you simply have something in your mind that is a natural phenomenon, picking out these natural phenomena and saying, oh yeah, this necessarily follows the laws of logic, I will call this rational, because that itself is a natural phenomenon. It's not distinct from the set of all natural phenomenon. It is the natural phenomenon. So it's called,
No,
it itself is called into question by the same problem. It doesn't
no, so
solve the problem.
our brain is a natural phenomena, arguably, and so our brain, the fact that it's a natural phenomena does not mean that it cannot inform us of non-natural phenomena, and does not mean
Who's
that it
us? Who
cannot.
is it informing? If we're
People like humans who
well,
form rational beliefs sometimes.
how can your brain inform you? Aren't you your brain in your view? Or like, isn't the you that's being informed? Like, what, you give information to a mind. If the mind is purely inside of your brain, how can your brain inform you?
I don't have super strong views about consciousness.
Mhm.
I'm somewhat sympathetic to a type of interactionist property dualism.
Well, but what I'm
But
getting at is, like, if your brain is something like a computer, right? Like I think it is. I think we have a really good computer. Computers don't give truth. Computers give consistency, right? It's just a bunch of logical gates under the hood and electrical signals.
yeah,
And they
but
just,
computers can figure out true things.
well, the computers can figure out consistent things, and the humans can infer true things. That's what they do.
Well, no, I mean we can make computers designed to figure out true things.
Well, like to take an example,
Like
of computer.
computers can figure out if a chess move increases or decreases one's probability of winning.
Right, but how does the computer actually output that, right? Or let's take something simpler, like 1 + 1. You have a screen, and the screen is lit up with pixels, right? Nothing that the pixels do is true. It's the human understanding of those pixels depicting a number 2, which is yet more abstraction in the human mind. Then we say, oh, that is true, right?
Well, no,
So
I mean
simply set them up to fall that way.
Computers can sort of process inputs in particular ways and produce outputs that
it's sort of like you can use rocks in the same way that you use computers, right? If you wanted to count, if you wanted to say 1 + 1, you wanted to do math, you put one rock and then another rock, and now there's 2 rocks. But the rocks didn't think, the rocks didn't reason, the rocks didn't produce necessary truth. What they did is they acted consistently, and we can use that to infer things that are true about the universe because we understand from them. That's all computers are doing. It's just in a much more complex electrical level. Right, the computers are giving us the truth.
Right. So the distinction in the human context would be, I think that in the human context we are sentient, and I think that our consciousness interacts with the world in ways, and so I think.
Right, but what I'm saying is, if our mind is the computer, then we don't have the truth, right? We're no better than a pile of rocks.
Our mind is not just the computer. Our mind is a conscious computer.
Our mind is a conscious computer. So the consciousness that we have, is that consciousness yet more physical computerism? Is that all that it is? Or is it something transcendent apart from the physical computer?
I don't have a super strong view, but I lean, I think, towards a type of dualism, particularly property dualism. So I think
and I understand you're on the spot. Like, I'm not trying to,
Yeah. But so let's say that I were to take the view that that consciousness is a property of brains that's strongly emergent from brains, that interacts with the world, and so as a result, let's say I were to grant that physicalism can't allow us to figure out true beliefs, but that there's just this extra consciousness on top of it that interacts with the world.
Yeah, and the extra consciousness can't be a part of our brain. It can't be part of us.
Well, it depends on what you mean by a part of us. It's an emergent property from our brain.
Right. It can't be. Well, for starters, it can't be a part of our physical us, right? Because if it was physical, it would be subject to the same problem that we're solving now, which is that physical processes itself can't produce necessary truth.
Well, no. So I don't think that's true at all, right? I don't think that I don't think that objection that physical things can't necessarily produce truth. I don't think that objection works, right? I don't understand why something that emerges through physical processes cannot.
Why not?
Well, why can't something that emerges through natural processes allow us to distinguish through natural and non-natural things?
Well, I just ran you through it, and I think the comment is true, because if we're distinguishing between thoughts, and thoughts are exclusively natural, right? We have a mechanism distinguishing between natural phenomenon. Then the thing distinguishing between natural phenomenon, if it itself is a natural phenomenon, it itself is called into question with the same problem. How can we know that that is rational, right?
Well, there are certain things that I think we can have direct acquaintance with, right? And so
when you say we have direct acquaintance with, what you really mean is, the chemicals that are sloshing about in a meat bag randomly with no
the view
intended
that
purpose.
I'm currently defending, right, is a type of property dualism, right? So when I say we, I mean this consciousness that is not reducible to, but is a emergent property of brains.
Right, but this consciousness exists as a manifestation of purely the same physical things that the thoughts and the brains are, right?
What do you mean by manifestation?
Well, like it's some kind of emergent thing, right? Like it itself doesn't necessarily exist physically, but if it exists at all, it exists as an abstraction or some kind of result of the things, right? Like if I spelled out the number 2 with rocks, with a bunch of rocks, I made a giant number 2 on the floor, right? The number 2, technically, in the most literal physical sense, doesn't exist there. But we would still look at it and say, hey, there's a number 2 there. But actually what we mean is there's a bunch of little rocks, right? It's like that. Like the 2 here would be a manifestation of these rocks. So is that what you're saying? That your mind is a manifestation of these physical processes? Like physical processes, no mind?
I still think I need to get a little bit more clarification on what you mean by a manifestation of them.
You didn't like my rock example?
Well, I mean, the example is not sufficiently clear. Like, what does it mean? Like, I think that when you have so the view that I'm currently defending, and I don't have super strong views on many philosophy of mind questions, but is that when you have a certain assemblage of physical information processing, you get this emergent consciousness thing, which is not strictly reducible to the things that comprise it. So
I don't believe in that. I don't think that if our computers were a lot faster, that Siri would become a real person, for example.
Well, okay, so that'll get into. So I disagree. I think that digital consciousness.
Oh, cool. Okay. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. I'm like, what the frick are you people? What is this? This is crazy talk, man.
Well, I think that digital consciousness is possible. Now, I don't think that it's likely possible by the current avenue. But so, we currently have digital neurons that can do the same type of information processing that our current brains can do. So
yeah, of course. We have computers way better than our brains.
Yeah, so if we replaced one neuron with a digital neuron, would we no longer be conscious?
Well, I don't think that the neurons themselves are the consciousness. So I think it would.
But so just yes or no?
Like I think it's similar to the problem of life, right? Like the assembly of the organic material isn't the life, right? The life is something in the material.
But just yes or no?
No, I don't think so.
Wait, so we would not. So if you replaced one neuron with a digital neuron?
Oh no! If you replaced a neuron with a digital neuron, no. Okay, yeah. In that sense, I do think, yeah. I think if you replaced all of them with digital neurons, you would have them. But I don't think that the neurons, I don't think a collection of neurons is the consciousness, right? I think the consciousness is something that sits in the collection of neurons.
Okay, so how many neurons would you have to replace for us to no longer be conscious?
Well, I think you could replace all of them, and we'd still be conscious.
Wait, but you just said that if you replace them all with digital neurons, we wouldn't be conscious.
No, I'm saying the assembly of the digital neurons isn't the consciousness.
Right.
Right, any more than the assembly of physical, bioorganic material is life, right? Like if I took a bunch of cat parts and I put them together and I had every single part that a cat needs, it wouldn't suddenly become a living cat, right? Even if I did a really good job assembling them in a perfectly recognizable way, they just be instantly dead, right?
Right.
There has to be
Yeah,
something going on already. Like there's got to be a
Sure. So
process
yeah,
moving.
that's fine. So then the question is just, so if you replaced all of our neurons with digital neurons, would we remain conscious?
If we replaced all of our neurons with digital neurons, and we could do this with a snap of our fingers, like without stopping anything, you know, zero time,
Right.
then I suspect, yeah, we'd probably remain conscious. Sure. Yeah.
And would we be any different, assuming that those neurons are isomorphs of our current neurons in
No, I
terms
don't
of
think
how
I
they
don't think we
process?
would. No. But I don't think
Okay.
it follows then
So
that we
then,
could have consciousness arise, right? Like
well,
it's
so
very possible that
couldn't we make, like, in theory, a physical replica of you, and then with digital neurons, and then make that be a digital consciousness?
well, I mean, there's all sorts of physical problems. I think if you're asking me metaphysically, is it possible? You know, if you had like a duplication machine and you like duplicated me and instantly replaced everything with, you know, neurons or something, then I don't know. I don't know at
Well,
that point. That's too
we
abstract for me.
already know how to make digital neurons, and we
Hmm.
can already, I don't know the exact, but I think we can make, like, through digital neurons something that's sort of like a worm, basically. We can sort of we can simulate a worm's brain, or maybe it's something beyond that, or
Hmm.
like, well, no, worms don't have brains. I don't know. I read about this a while ago. And so with enough technology, it seems possible to have digital neurons that do what the human brain does. But
Yeah, I
it seems
agree with
like
that.
but would it not be conscious if it did that? If you
Well,
had digital
would
neurons
what
that,
would
were
not
like
what not be
basically
conscious?
exact copies of what the human brain
Like
does?
if you replaced all of my brains with digital neurons, or if you replaced them with like,
Well, you've
or I'm
already
sorry,
granted that would be conscious,
yeah. So you're saying if you
right?
assembled
So
a new thing, would
right,
that be conscious?
with digital neuron, right? So
Yeah.
so obviously, if we, like, placed your brain
Hmm.
into a, into, like, you surely you agree that consciousness is tied to the brain. It's not tied to, like, the liver or anything,
Yeah, of course, of course.
right?
But
So
I
if
don't
we
think the brain
place
is the consciousness.
Right. So the view that I'm defending is not that
Mhm.
the brain is consciousness. Rather, it's that consciousness is a property that is an emergent property of the brain.
Yeah, see, I don't agree. I
So
think
much
it
like
requires the brain, but it doesn't. Like your life
much
requires the
like
heart, but your heart isn't your life, unless you're playing Minecraft. Then it literally is.
well, right. So so a functioning heart is a necessary condition for being alive, but it's certainly not a sufficient condition. So,
Mhm.
what are the other conditions for being conscious,
I don't
other
know.
than having a
I
functional
couldn't hope to
brain?
tell you
That
honestly. Um,
Well,
I don't
okay,
know.
but I mean, it seems like on your view, it would be at least possible to have digital consciousness, right? Via digital neurons.
Uh, I don't know if I would agree with that one.
Well,
No.
but you
I,
granted that if we replaced your brain with a
yeah,
digital neuron
I
brain,
don't think that would be digital consciousness. I think that would be regular old consciousness, and you um maybe ported it over
okay,
digitally. I don't think that would be the same thing.
so let's imagine we
Right,
have
like you're talking about creating a new consciousness using only computers. I think that
uh,
seems way different from taking an existing consciousness and replacing every part of it, right? It's kind of like a composition fallacy, kind of a meme. Like, you know, at what point does this stop being you and start being something different? You know, like I don't know. Um, but I think
okay,
maybe even if you replaced every single neuron in your brain, which of course there are tons of physical prohibiting factors for that.
sure, but it seems at least possible to make you have, like, a
You
digital
think
brain.
physically possible? How do
Not
you
with
not
current
kill
tech,
someone while replacing all the neurons?
not with current technology,
I don't
but
think you would need you'd need to literally stop time and like replace the. I mean, we're talking about things that are maybe metaphysically possible.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with the details, but I know that AI researchers think that it would be possible to create a digital neuron-based, basically, simulation of the human brain
Hmm.
that functions the same way that humans
Yeah, they think a lot of
do
things. Good.
within, like, less than a century, probably. Sorry, you
Well,
mentioned that you. What
maybe I'll be
time did
debating
you?
him in less than a century then, and we'll see.
Yeah. Sorry, what time did you say you had to go?
Actually, right now. But
Oh,
thanks for
okay.
having me, dude.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It was a
All
good
right, I'll see you
chat,
later.
as always. Yeah. Hey, peace. Hey, thanks for watching, everyone.